Welcome to Running in the 70s, where we interview, meet, and get to know athletes of all kind who were running in the 70s. I'm your host, Matthew Kleinowski. Unfortunately, some of the audio is a little distorted. Ron Tabb's internet was in and out, but it is pretty much understandable. We miss a name or two, but I think you can figure out who he's talking about. Today on the podcast, we're down in Florida with a gentleman who has been around the world. He's run marathons in 5 different continents. Familiar with the term first, often first American, often first place. And we're going to go way back in history. Ron Tabb had an exceptional career in the late 70s and early 80s. Then his name stayed in running as a coach, coaches some spectacular performance athletes, mentoring people, and still involved today. Online coaching. There's all kind of interesting things here, but we're going to start with the origin story and reflections on the 70s. Welcome today, Ron Tabb. Hi, Ron.
Thank you for having me.
Ron, I've followed your career. Let's tell everybody your origin story. When, how, and where did you first become a racer?
I got involved in sport 53 years ago. My first experience running was in 1971 as a junior in high school. Originally, I tried to play high school football. Kansas City Chiefs fan. If you look behind me, mementos. So I'm still a huge football fan. I ended up not going out for football back in those days, take a physical education class. I come from a real small Midwestern town. And our PE teacher took a tractor out and plowed a half-mile cross-country course. We did this for approximately a week. Every day we'd do the same course. So some of the upperclassmen learned that this guy was running really well in this cross-country course. We didn't have cross-country at our school, and talked me into coming out and running track. I was hesitant in getting involved in track because the really fast sprinters at the school, because I played football, that these guys were much faster than me. I didn't really have any desire to running track. I knew nothing about the sport. The only thing I knew about is watching Jim Ryan run the 68 Olympics. Being from Missouri, everyone knows who Jim Ryan. So that was basically all I knew about track and field. To go out for track because I saw it as an avenue for me to possibly earn a letterman's jacket in the sport. And guys explained to me, oh, there are a lot of different events in track. They talked me into coming out as a long story. Ended up, I was a conference champion, district champion. As a result of having a couple of really good sprinters at our school, I came and was recruiting one of the sprinters who was a player. He was a state champion in the 100 and more or less requested to talk to me. After a lengthy discussion, he offered me a come to Central Missouri State University. If it's not been for the sprinter on the team, I don't know that I would have been recruited to a college because my times weren't that fast. I was a 442 miler in high school, and those aren't exactly credentials that I get even back in those days.
What was on your feet when you ran that first mode field?
What was Converse? I remember dad got really angry at me for going out and buying a pair of expensive shoes. I don't even remember what they were. That was the first shoe that I ran in.
What was your high school coaching like on track then?
The coaches didn't have a clue what to do with the distance. Got stipends to do track. They were fine as far as the throwers and the sprinters were concerned, but they had never dealt with the distance. I began doing my own research and trying to learn about distance running. So my thing was I miles in, and we had a military, the town that I grew up in, and on the weekends I'd go and then do some laps around the indoor track, go shoot some more baskets and do some more laps. And just that was a routine. My senior year, again, we didn't have cross country. And I didn't go out for football my senior year either. I was at the military academy where we had the indoor track, and I did 4 times 2 mile. remember we had the old handheld stopwatches. Gone out and purchased one of those, and I was timing myself. The last I remember vividly, I ran 10:19, and I called the head coach up to tell him. I said, "Coach, I just ran 10:19, which was for 2 miles." He didn't believe me because my time 10:39. So he didn't believe that I was capable of running that fast. But that was being self-coached.
Let me go back and just get a few more things about just some of this background. It's just interesting to me. When did you get a letter? Did you letter your first year?
I led her my junior year. I set the school record at 10:39. I won. Then I got bronchitis. So that was the last meet that I ran. I didn't have an opportunity to run state as a result. I set the conference record with my best time at 10:39.
Let me ask you then about being self-coached. How did you race? Tactics? Did you figure any of that out, or did you just barrel down?
I always went to the front. I was a front runner all through my collegiate career and my post collegiate career and the other races back in the 70s and 80s. I was always in the front. That was just my nature.
Do you have a kick?
I had a very good strong kick. The district meet in high school, I broke 60 seconds, 440 back in those days for the district. I had a guy that I had a bit of a rivalry, and the guy always just sat on me. I decided that at the district meet, I was going to change tactics and a little bit further out then, as opposed to waiting until the last 200 meters. And so I decided to start pushing with the lap, and I broke him. And then when the bell lap hit, I changed gears again and ended up with a second, the last 400.
Nice. About your psychology. At which point of this did you start to identify yourself as a runner, not just as an athlete?
In high school, I was really small. Many stories that we've heard about other kids too small to play basketball. I was one of those. I was scrawny Ronnie in high school because I was at 5'4", 95 pounds. There's not too many 5'4", 95-pound football players, but my true love was football. And that was the era when the Kansas City Chiefs were Super Bowl champions and about 35 miles from Kansas City. So it was ingrained in us that I wanted to play football. So I tried to identify myself as an athlete. You have a little bit of an inferior in as an athlete, the success that I was having in high school mindset as to, okay, I'm not going to be a football. I can be a pretty good runner. My senior year, when I started setting records and winning races, was probably when I identified myself. But I was also realistic, looking at nationwide, looking at what other around the country. And I couldn't imagine breaking 2 miles because Craig Virgin, remember, was coming up during that time as well. I would get lapped in a 2 mile if I were on the same track. So it was okay. I'm good for where I am. I was realistic. It was good for small time for a small town coming from a small school. We had less than 90 kids in my graduating class. We didn't even have a track. We didn't have cross country, a coach that knew anything about distance running. So everything I learned by my own doing. That we had a military academy in the town. That's where we did all of our workouts. Guys on the team, they would drive over, and it was only a mile and a half to the military campus, and would do my runs to run to the track from the high school, where they jump in a car and drive over there because that was too far for them to run.
We're going to move to university running, but I have to mention there's going to be a lot of people listening to this from Western Pennsylvania. So they're Pittsburgh Steeler fans. But yeah, we all remember Kansas City beating Minnesota Chiefs and really opening up the NFL. I was a fan of Kansas City back then. One thing that you mentioned, of course, already aware of Jim Ryan, but you're heading into university then, the 72 Olympics. So how was your view of the wider world as a fan of running?
So at 72, I was a freshman in college. We had a cross country camp, and oh, it was brutal. I was on the depth chart of the incoming freshmen, I would remember distinctly, I was the 11th. I had the 11th lowest or fast, where you want to put it. We had a state champion from Iowa. We had a state champ that were incoming freshmen. Coach had only been there for 2 years. And I go pretty quiet, pretty conservative, pretty naive. I get to the camp and I'm bashful. When I say camp, we were really camping. We were intense, taking workouts and going out for a 10-mile morning and a 10-mile run in the afternoon. And I'm going, man, I have done a 10-mile run. Now I'm doing 2 of them in a day. As a result, and I'm wearing these old Converse running shoes. I'm looking at the Nike shoes. They were pretty much thin as the old waffle leather trainer there behind you. They were thin shoes. And I'd gone out and bought another pair of things because we thought better. The thing with lighter and better don't really 80 miles a week because all it does is beat your legs up, and ended up with severe shin splints, which cost me my entire freshman year. I didn't run. I ran an indoor track meet. Then I missed the entire outdoor season. It's a disaster. But one thing I really started getting with track and field then, because Frank Shorter had the Olympic gold medal in the marathon. And I remember watching that and listening to the broadcast and feeling so bad. Kenny Moore was the second American, just missed by one spot. And then Prefontaine missing a medal by what I look back on with such fond memories. I never imagined that I would ever meet these players, having a conversation with Kenny Moore or training with Frank Shorter or having Jim McKay, who was with ABC, narrating an up close and personal. Those were mind boggling. And then to meet Bill Bauer and have Bill Dillinger, who was Pre's coach, team me. For me, I look back on that, and that's one of the great highlights of my running experience period, was just after all of this occurred in Munich in 1972, I'm world stage with many of these people that I grew up with, and those people inspired me. Actually, Bill Dillinger obviously had a great impact on my running career.
Do you remember who was the first instance of what am I doing talking to this person or standing on the starting line with this person?
Absolutely. Yeah. So my first Boston was in 78, and I just graduated a year earlier. Actually ended up getting a hardship case for that freshman year that I was awarded a 5th year. So I got to run in 77. So in 78, college, I made the decision to not to begin working, to begin a career. I have my entire life in front of me to work, but I might be good enough to possibly qualify for the Olympic trials. This was a state champion in cross country. And I called him up, and he graduated the year before us. His name, pretty successful runner in his own right. I called Charlie up. I said, Charlie, why don't we take the next couple of years and see if we can't trials qualifying standard? We had an assistant at Central Missouri, Bob Busby, and Bob had qualified in 76 in the marathon. And I had been beating him for the last couple of years at Warrensburg or in workouts. And so it gave me the belief that I might get a qualifying time. I said, I have the rest of our lives to work. This window of opportunity, if we don't take advantage of it now. So ended up moving in together and training. There was some good coach. Leonard Hilton was down there. Got a good coach. Jim Clatchy was down there. For where we were, it seemed like a good location, but living and training in Houston and 5-degree temperatures and 80 to 90% humidity. I'd won the Houston Marathon, set a record. I'd won Mardi Gras, St. Louis Marathon. I'd won a few marathons. And he said, yeah, you someplace or you should come up to Oregon because the conditions are better and the environment is better for, but ultimately after the Olympic trials in 80, that's where I ended up going.
Let's get a little bit of details of your university career. because it was a time of transition. Was there a women's team at all?
The last year at Central, they had a women's cross country and they'd started up a women's track program. Well, at the same time, they had their own schedule. They had not integrated the programs at the time where we do today. The meets are typically at the same time, same location.
Let me ask you then about your actual running. You ran almost every distance there, and that was back when they had the Division II top runners would get to run Division I. You had some neat opportunities because of the way things worked then.
They changed it since then, but back in the 70s, if you were top six at nationals, then you were compete at the NCAA D1 championships. So my senior year, I finished sixth at nationals and ultimately had the opportunity to go to and run the D1 championships and experience because we had a run against Division I schools. In fact, we beat the University of Missouri on their home big invitational. We beat Southwest Missouri State, a two-time national championship. But when I got down to Denton, we're talking about Craig Virgin, Nick Rose, I've 100 and something. And I looked at those results from 76 and I'm going, oh, because later down the road, I saw probably 60 or 70 of those guys at the Olympic and Boston Marathon, New York City Marathon, huge. That was an era where Craig Virgin, just any great runners back in the day. And I didn't see myself competing at that level back in 76, but within a couple of years, being self-realizing what I needed individually as opposed to a team concept. This is one of the things that I felt that to be successful at this college level, I wanted to coach my athletes on a basis and not collectively as a team. Where in coaching, okay, here's the workout, it's posted, here's the workout today, and everyone does exactly. We're not all created equal when it comes to running. Athletes have their strengths and weaknesses. So I like to work on the weaknesses and give the individual an opportunity to get the most out of what they based on
When did you first look at your own nutrition during training?
nutrition of my Bill Rogers and I, Benji Durden, we just had a little Zoom, and that was one of the things that we talked about was diet and nutrition. Today, that the sport has become more science based, and I'm teasing Bill. I said, I remember reading about what your diet looked like, cold pizza with mayonnaise on it, and I go in. We would just think for nutrition back in the day. I'd sit down and power down a bag of Doritos after a hard workout. So now would I recommend doing that? Absolutely not. How much better would, and had we paid closer attention to diet?
When the book Eat to Win came out, one of the examples the author used was the tennis players burning 7,500 calories. He said, you guys can eat Big Macs all day. It won't matter. But you had some, I don't want to say ridiculous, but people calling you mad for the mileage you ran.
I had where I peaked at 70 miles, and I didn't do that very often. That was a rare thing for me to do that. 1 to 140 range until Coach Dellinger coaching me. Then I dropped down to 110 to a little over 120. I modified my training. But when you're running 115, 16, 17 miles, okay, you're burning 2,000 a day. Okay. So now you add in the training that you're doing, you easily can consume 4,000 calories to 4,500 calories.
Let's jump around. There's so much to talk to you about. People are going to read the Wikipedia, and we'll get on to the most recent happenings in the world of marathoning. But I want to talk about you ran world championships. You're the fastest American. Let's just get some fun stuff out here. At one point, you were the 5th fastest ever marathoner. from America. Certainly a state record, Louisiana, Houston, you had the fastest time that those times held out for quite a few years. But one thing that interests me is the 5 different continents. You ran in one of the first marathons in Brazil. You went to Asia, China, these exotic places. How did you get involved, invited, funded, and what was the time frame that you would do to be running in these many away time zones?
Rogers and I were just talking about that the other day in conversations. Only 2 Americans to accomplish that, to win major marathons on 5 continents. Frank has 4 this day and age, but I don't know if I will ever do that again. I had set the Missouri state record, the Texas state record. Really, those were nice performances. Top 10 at New York in 79. But when I went to in 80 and finished third, second American, really opened up the doors for me. Early thereafter, I was invited to go to Japan, did an invitation to run Paris, invitation to run Beijing. I began receiving invitations to run around the world. Who's going to pass up a trip to go to Paris and get a nice appearance fee on top of it? I'm not passing that up. That's too it's an opportunity. And that was the same case with the other, races that I went to. The table appearance fees, and they were substantial. Plus, I was sponsored. Most of my career, I was an Adidas athlete. There was a short time I was a Nike athlete. Interestingly enough, Gil Knight hand delivered my contract to me in Beijing. I'd won that marathon. So we'd been in negotiations. He was doing business in Beijing to say that corresponded the Beijing race or after the race. He hand delivered the contract, which I thought was a pretty cool story.
Yeah. Some of these cities are great. Paris wasn't then necessarily considered a major marathon, not using the capital M like we have today with the major marathon circuit. But Beijing, I've been there. I've been there recently. I was already there. What was it like in terms of pollution, in terms of city reception? How did you feel as a foreigner in Beijing? Was it a very alien experience?
It was really interesting because Beijing 40 years ago was a huge difference. I was there. You had to have a diplomatic visa to get in to begin with. That was a real pain in the butt because I had to go from Eugene to San Francisco to the Chinese consulate, get my visa to go into the country. There were no light. At the eerie feeling going to the airport there and then being put on bus where I didn't know I was the only person. I was taken to this, and each floor had and they had. It was just, it was a little eerie to go there, but it's really interesting to visit. First of all, at the airport, they check and see what you have. They want to know how many watches you have, exactly what you're bringing into the country. They don't want certain types of contraband. Be really cautious about that. And you were told about this before you went there. But then you check into your hotel and I don't speak Chinese. So there's a communication thing that you have to deal with. And then there's a food thing that you have to deal with. How do you find the right, there's no even to go to at this time. There's nothing really that is American or Western in Beijing. Everyone is literally on bicycles. At the time, the first trip there, no private that owned a car. Everything was state run at the time. I video camera with me. So I have some awesome video from my first to Beijing. I've been there 3 times and it changed from, the first time to the last, but just really interesting to go around. But morning I'm out and they have these, I forget what you call these plants. What do they call, where they put, I'm trying to remember, when you go to the bathroom, what do you call those plants?
Chamber pots. Yeah.
So you would see those being moved in the morning, the rickshaws. I saw it was pretty disturbed. Someone pulling a cart and they had a body in it. And it's just strange stuff. That
Wow. You
you just,
Monty Python, bring out your dead in modern day. Yeah.
yeah, you just didn't see that type stuff. Or you had to check in to when you went to your hotel room, they're monitoring who was coming and going at the hotel. So
It's quite a lot of distractions, the change in food, the change in just able to relax in your time away from training. How long did you spend for just this instance in China before the race? How long did you take to acclimate?
I ran really slow. I think I ran 2:28. That could be off by a few minutes. It could have been faster. I remember it was a really bad race for me. I was, I think, in the top 30. It was one of my first really big, just invited athletes,
How many ran?
80 or 90, possibly.
Wow.
Yeah. And they shut Denny for this race. You felt like it was a very sterile environment because everyone was on the same type of bicycle. Everyone wore the same clothes.
Let me go into this one topic because it's something that's came up in the 70s and you mentioned it. It's the money moving around. We don't have to go into too much details. When do you remember that it was coming? Were the athletes talking about it, or was it just between you and the race directors in an envelope? And when did it make it into the public eye?
Actually, Bill Rogers and I just talked about this because he talked to Bill, and Bill told me what he got for his first contract. Now, I was a little bit taken by how little it was for his first contract. And then, but in 79, I was still living in Houston and I was looking at running the Tulsa run, it's the 15K. I was trying to get just some travel money after to go up to run the race. And Frank actually helped me with that. I should reach out to the race director and ask for assistance. So the race director and Frank ended up bringing me in for the Tulsa run. I think Stan Mavis won it. I think Frank was second. I was third. It was one of the races where Frank and I had probably 10 or 12 races, 78 and 80, where he was always one spot in front of me. And we just had some battles in 2 or 3 times. And Crowley, Louisiana, New York, Honolulu. It was just like, I just couldn't get over the hump. And he was always one spot. But Frank was very helpful. And I started learning a little bit about the prize money. Not, there was, because in 79, I ran New York, finished eighth there. And I was awarded, I believe it, dollars. So
Say that number again. That blipped.
I'm adding that number back in that we couldn't hear it. Ron said $1,500.
and then I get a call from someone from the New York Times that athletes were getting paid for their performance from where they placed. And I don't know anything about it because we were quote unquote at the time. That was a nice little payday, especially but I was truly an amateur athlete trying to me.
Let's talk about when you got to the biggest stages and you're thinking from those early days in Houston of let's make the Olympic trials to your actual Olympic trials run, let's say 1980.
Houston, I had been under contract with Adidas since some because of those performances we mentioned earlier. My background is PR, communication. I started sending out resumes to different shoe companies looking for sponsorship because I knew that there was the exposure that I was earning might merit sponsorship. Sub 4 reached out to me. Saucony reached out to me. Brooks. I had done a paper while I was in college on Adidas, and I wore Adidas all through college. So that was the company that I was really hoping to work a deal out with. And had all these Diodora was the one, Tom Gillespie, track coach at Carl Lewis's coach, reached out to me because a company, Diodora, had reached out to him and they were looking for athletes in the US to, and by the way, they made one of the best spikes I've ever run in. Fabulous spike. But anyway, I get this huge is And then they contacted me afterwards and they could sign me. And they were starting up a group of Adidas runners. They hadn't identified a name to it, and I suggested that they just call it Team Adidas. And, but anyway, still roommates with my her teammate from college. And yeah, I get this box, a huge box. It's shoes, apparel. If you remember the first time you get some, that was really pretty cool to this big package from Adidas. But I said to him, I said, why don't you call this Team Adidas? So I came up with my own business, a race that I won, and that's what I would hand out, almost self promotion, almost like Craig and his self promotion with front runners.
Let's talk race. Let's talk about the Olympic trial race for 1980.
Okay, so the Olympic trial, that was the thing, was to qualify for the trials. Remember, after college, I said this window of opportunity will close soon. Oh, but we knew that we were not going to the Olympics because of invading Afghanistan. So we knew that we weren't going to the Olympics. So that's why I decided Houston, New Orleans, and Boston before the trials in May. And in January, I set a new course record and a new PR, ran 2:13. And then I won New Orleans 2:11 flat, set a state record there. A few weeks after that, ran Boston. And the Boston, like I said, the Boston race is one that really put me on the map. That set my, but the Olympic trials were 5 weeks later. I wasn't even sure I was going to do, pretty pissed off at the boycott. I told you that I'd met Paul Geis and that I was going to do well. And I started putting my thought for, because I knew the Olympics were going to be in Los Angeles. So my thoughts really were going toward, and so I left Houston. I got back from Buffalo. I'm sorry. The week after I got back, I took off in a car and moved to Oregon. And that was before the trials, which if we'd have been going to the Olympics, I would have stayed and trained in Houston until after the trials were over. I didn't see a purpose in really putting much emphasis on, as far as I was concerned, it was, yeah, I was applied and I had one of the fastest qualifying times for the trials, but I really didn't. In fact, it mattered so little that I invitation to go to run the Cleveland Revco Marathon the week before the Olympics. And the only reason I ended up running the trials was I was already in Cleveland and I decided since I'm in Cleveland, I might as well go. And I could run a marathon I run marathons hard in the past, running the trials a week after Cleveland. So I went to Buffalo, had a good time, drank some beers, had buffalo wings, bonded with a lot of the guys there, and ended up running 2:12 and having a pretty good race wheel because I ended up with what I'd been training. I got injured at the Girl Marathon wearing a shoe called the Marathon 80s. It's a real sold racing flat. And so I got fasciitis really bad and ultimately ended up having surgery on it. Yeah, I finished fourth at the trials and was happy about, I was a little bit surprised because I did expectations for that to be able to finish fourth at I guess it's an accomplishment, but go anywhere. And what a lot of people don't realize are the people team that year, they are only considered Olympians by the International Olympic Committee or by I recognized as Olympians because they didn't compete in the Olympics. Angie told me that. I didn't realize that.
There's a teammate of mine who was on the 84 team that I think also qualified, Jim Wooding in the decathlon from Western Pennsylvania.
I know
Had
that.
that same, Jim, fortunate enough to stay uninjured and able to compete well in 84. Let's divert off before we go to 1984 and what happened to you there that disrupted your plans with Mary Decker. That time frame, she set world and national records aplenty. What was your role? It's sometimes described as mentoring, assisting, coaching. What was your role there in Mary's success?
Okay, so after 1980, I started having issues with the plantar fascia. We had a doctor in Houston He ran for the Houston Harriers, Baxter. Great man, saved my career. I ended up and I went back to Houston and had the surgery done. This was before the Paris Marathon in 1981. After the surgery, I went down to Atlanta to train for before Boston. I wasn't sure it was done at that time. I thought that might be over with because I would know what having surgery on your foot was going to do if I would be able. But so I went down to Atlanta, met a girl at the road race the year before and stayed with her. And so I said, I'm going to try Boston. I'm under contract with Adidas. I'm going to just run it more or less as a workout to see if I can go the distance in a competitive situation. Then I ran 2:22 for a training flat. It's called the TRX competition. And ran in that and I'm going, I didn't have any issues. I didn't have any pain. That was a positive. I flew back. I had received an invitation to run the Paris Marathon and getting a nice little appearance fee to go back there. Who's going to pass up a trip to Paris? But when I got I was out with a friend of mine from Athletics West. She's from, you might know him from West Virginia, successful runner back there. And we were out.
We blipped on the name. Was it
Alex Cass? Do you remember?
Oh yeah, I've been chatting with Alex a lot recently.
Oh, easy character.
Yeah. We're trying to keep it civil.
Yeah. Okay. Hey, we're out and I had just bought a Porsche and a Porsche 944. We're out celebrating coming back into town and we're out we call them, they were Rainier beers with dates. So we were out just partying a little. Alex worked for Athletics West and he ran for Athletics West as well. I said, hey, Alex, I said, I've always meet Mary Decker in person and a little liquid courage and finally convinced Alex, okay, let me introduce me. He said, I'll show you where she lives when I'm not going to. It's too late. So anyway, and after a few Rognes, I stopped in front of her house, went and knocked on her door. And Alex is going, all right, you can't. He was pretty embarrassed. And he goes, you're going to doing this. Anyway, long story short, she had her surgery on her shin. She didn't have anything to do. I don't remember exactly what night it was. We ended up going out to a place called the Mule Camp over in Springfield. We closed the place down and then went back and Alex off and then at his place. And then I had to drop Mary off at her place. She locked her keys in the house. That's what a shame. Back to my place and spending the night I won't go, but anyway, spent the night there and one thing led to another. This is for the Paris Marathon. So I was still pretty much focused. We started going out. We were going pretty much every day. We were out doing things together. And then I went to Paris, won the Paris Marathon, ran a pretty quick time, got back, invited Mary to go to Hawaii, her mom down in LA, and then met Mary in LA. And we took to Hawaii and it's a little romance. And shortly thereafter, we were married. I think it was September. Yeah, I think we got married in September. Once we got married, I started putting all of because she wanted to have kids. I wasn't into having kids. Anyway, I started devoting my time and training with her. So I did 81 from, I would say, August of 81 until almost the beginning of 83. I did every training run that she did. So I put my running on the back burners. I had another bout with plantar fasciitis. I hadn't had surgery on, but for the stretch that we had from 81 to the beginning of 83, I did her workouts with her. So I was able to hold her back and I could push her in workouts. So basically had a training partner that was there for 24/7. Yeah.
How fast could you run a mile in those days?
I would have been able to run 4 minutes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's tell one story about this, and anything else you think it would be fun to tell. But one of the fascinating stories is the 10,000-meter record that Mary set.
How that came about was we just come back from the European and we'd run races in Paris, in Lausanne. It's just those three that we did on the first half of the European circuit in the summer. Then we were going to go, but so we came back, and this was must have been in July. I'm thinking we get back to Eugene, and I see that there's an all-colors meet at Hayward. Nudged Mary. I go, hey, you know what? I said, the shape that you're in right now, the American record for the 10,000 is really soft. I said, you could basically do this. And I knew the shape that so well because we did every workout together. So why don't we talk to Dick Brown and talk to him about setting it up so you can get it certified? Because I can't go out there and pace her she has to have a certain number of women in the race. Who was an Oregon runner? I can't remember who else was in. Anyway, we set it up for her, and I figured out the split needed to run in order to get it, which I figured it down to each what she should be shooting for. So I'm in Grady, split off to her, and as I'd done all season long and for the last year, because I was even at Mill Rules, I'm in reading every lap off to her when she's racing. Well, anyway, she destroyed the record, which and wearing not it's just wearing flats, but
Yeah, that gave her a neat span of records from about 800 meters up through
she
10K
held
too.
every American record from 800 to 10,000, and then she held. We were working together, and Dick Brown was never at all of them. I was at every race, at every meet, and I was well, Dick wasn't. So again, I had a better feel for what she was capable of doing. She could have been the first woman to break 2:20 in the marathon. We folks decided to do the marathon. Unbelievable. But yeah, while we were the one in 82 and then it's carried over into 8, we're separated by the time we got done with the indoor season and I started 83. But she set the world record in the outdoors, the 3,000, 5,000 outdoors, and the 10,000.
Right.
And I'm not sure what American woman can make that claim.
Yeah.
That's pretty
Well,
amazing.
so it's pretty amazing. And it's pretty neat that you had a role in that. And I'm sure that was an amazing time to be running two elite athletes together like that all the time.
What you were asking how fast I could run a mile. And it's funny because being with Mary, we would always be interviewed together. And a lot of the reporters would go, can you run? Can you keep up? Can you keep up with it? And I was just like, oh my God, you guys research because I've had a fairly successful career this last couple of years until I started training exclusively. But yeah, it was funny. Yeah. Can you keep up? I can, it's amazing, but so anyway,
Yeah. The thing I wanted to go on to next was the role you had in American running history. You'll tell the story if everybody doesn't know. Discovering the marathon in Meb Keflezighi.
after the 88 Olympic trials and then 92, not qualifying, I knew it's time to find a career now and find a job. So I applied at Cuyamaca Community College in El Cajon, which is a suburb of San Diego. I'd never coached organized teams or clubs before, but obviously I had a lot of money and coaching experience. So Cuyamaca program, I actually took us to where we had the number one team or community college team in the nation. We didn't have a track or a cross country course when I took over this program. They didn't have high expectations. They just looked good hiring someone like Ron Tabb with his experience more than they bargained for because the first year we finished second at the conference meet. And the next a couple of years. We had the top mid higher country. We would have beat a lot of Division One teams. So have a track facility to use. We'd often go to high school, and that's where Meb went to school. And I knew who Meb was, an eye on the high school runners in your area. And so I knew about Meb. And one day we were at the track and he was sitting in the stands there. And I came up and talked to him. I asked, well, and he was having some downtime because he had Achilles and it looked like he was going to be having some downtime. I said, I do massage therapy. Let me see if I can't help you a little bit from that standpoint, doing a little massage work. And he didn't know anything about who I was. He just knew that one thing led to another. We started training together and then I started writing scouts for him. And he I couldn't coach him directly because he was a high school athlete and high school coach. That's where we got started and would advise him what to do, what not to do. If he had an idea of what the workouts were going to look like, I tell him how to approach the work. If there was a race, I would suggest to him how to approach the race. I almost lost my job because I got so involved with his coaching. His high school coach was getting pissed off at me because Med started everything I was doing. And so I got in hot water with the conference committee athletic director with the high school. It was where Meb actually had to write, I still have the letter. Meb had to write it in me because I was on the brink of losing my job at Cuyamaca. And I told him senior year, I'd made the decision that my wife and I were going to move to Oregon from San Diego. And I called Dillinger and I said, Bill, I've got an athlete down here that you really need to look at. You got to bring, I said, he's going to need full financial assistance because you're immigrants from Eritrea and they're not going to have the ability to pay for his schooling, money in my budget. And Meb wanted to come to Oregon because he knew that I was moving. He felt we had a relationship coming to Oregon with me because he trusted me and knew me. Bill just said, no, from having the money wrong. He ended up going to UCLA, which a really good choice. But years down the road after Meb had graduated from UCLA out with Bill Dillinger and Meb with the three of us were as the biggest mistake I ever made. Yeah, because Meb in so many races at UCLA, it would have been a big boost to the Oregon program.
Let me ask you if you can recall, what was it you saw in a 1,600 miler, 2-miler? Was it your bias of success and the marathon, or what was it that you said, I see a marathon champion there?
Because we would always run together on the weekends. During the summer, we trained together. I was still running pretty high level. I just missed qualifying for the Olympic. So for me to go out and do 54-minute 10-mile run, I'm still capable of doing that. And we often did Fridays or Saturdays or Sundays and going, dang, this high school kids that was hanging. And I was always a coach on a very nature because I'd seen so many California athletes the time they left high school and by the time they got after the college careers, they were done. And I didn't want to see Meb end up that way. I kept his mileage usually in the 45 to 50 mile, but we would do a long run together on the weekends, almost always 10 miles, but he was doing 56, 55 10 milers, but he was so relaxed at that pace. Strides, because we're the same height and same weight, it was almost like we were shadowing each other on the run. By the time he was a senior or he was graduating, because we were trying to figure out which schools, because he had scholarship offers all over the country. I was encouraging him to build. I wasn't able to afford to pay for his education. Bill didn't have any scholarship money. So I think that Bob Larson and Meb combination was a real good, it worked really well. But I told Meb his senior year, Meb, you have the potential. I said, but you have to realize potential is one thing, being it is an entirely different matter. I said, you have the potential to become one of the greatest distance runners. Again, Meb doesn't know it. We don't have social media, all that. So he doesn't really know anything about my running career other than, I ran some marathons. And that's about it. I never really discussed what I had done as an athlete. In fact, he probably didn't even know until early 2000s when we started professional career. But I said, the big thing here, you have to stay out of trouble. Don't get a girl in college. Don't join a fraternity. Stay away from those evils that distract you from your training. Those are the biggest things that will prevent you from seeing your full potential. He was a good listener. He was obviously very smart, but it's funny because I told him, I said, here's what I envision happening to you. And you'll make the team, the Olympic team in 2010, 2004. You'll have a chance of making the team. You'll move up to the marathon. You'll have a chance of potentially winning a medal in the Olympics. He goes, oh no, I'm going to be a miler in college. I said, you may have said, you don't have the necessary speed to be a world-class miler. I said, but you have the strength and endurance to be 5 and 10,000 and eventually marathon runner. So this is before anyone knew who Meb was.
Yeah. And it's quite a bit of history. It has become.
When you're with someone and you run with them, you can tell what their strengths are. I knew he had good speed. He didn't have amazing speed. He was a 154-meter runner in high school. He was a 405 miler. He was good, but he definitely had room for improvement. But because I had been so concerned with training in high school, it gave him lots of room to improvements and see those improvements. It wasn't like in high school. He was, like I said, we were doing 45 to 50 of his training.
Yeah. Okay. Let me ask you for some reflections on the scaling out. It seems like the end of your competitive career was kind of something you thought about the whole time, that my career is going to come later. I've got the window of opportunity for racing. When you got a job, you were able to coach. How was your competitive drive? Like you say, you didn't feel that you had to tell Meb all of your running accomplishments. So as a coach in your role there, what I'm trying to ask is, how did you move your drive for competition to seeing success in someone else to not being on the track yourself? How did that all fit in your psychological life?
Well, to greatness for me, I was exposed to so many. I never viewed myself as being, I have a greater appreciation and understanding of success I had than I did back then. Back then, I looked at Frank Shorter. I looked at Bill Rogers still. I idolize him. I always looked at myself as someone aspired Frank Shorter and Bill Rogers, and I never realized that. But in looking now back at that machine, because I never won Boston and I never won New York, does that mean I feel like I never succeeded? I trained with Alberto Salazar. Alberto and I trained together for a couple of years. I was in the presence of in Eugene, Matt Centrowitz, Bill McChesney,
Rudy Chapa were out there then?
Rudy. I trained and raced with them. Craig Virgin. So I was always looking up. Yeah. First workout I did at Oregon with Coach Dillinger, we did a 5 run on the track at 7:00 in the morning. And I ran 24. I was like, damn, and 7:00 they're out here kicking. They're running 23 minutes for 5 miles and I'm getting my ass destroyed. And I'm going, I never felt like I was on equal these guys. Tom Byers, I did workouts with him. We did in and out miles on Amazon Trail, Adidas Trail. And I'm going, yeah, this is a guy who's 350. I just never that. And as a 209, 210, someone now looking back had some pretty fast times. I had a lot of success at as my career as a whole, as a marathon runner, myself as a marathon runner. I knew that's where the money was. You're either going in the mile or the marathon. I didn't want to run cross country. I didn't cross country. I loved track was I would have, if I could have run 10,000 on the track or 13 minutes for the 5,000, I would have spent, if I could have run 3:50 in the mile. I knew that road racing, I knew that I could make a good living. And so I gave up. I used the track occasionally for that would assist me for the marathon. But going back to your question earlier, what could you run a mile? 83, I was getting ready to run a marathon in Australia the following week. And I was entered 10,000, but I'd had some workouts that it indicated that I could probably in shape to run 357, 358 for a mile. I went to Bill and I said, Bill, or everyone calls him Bill and that knows him. So I said, Bill, I said, and it's for the mile. So what do you think of the mile instead of the 10,000 at pre this week? And he goes, I'll leave it up to you, but for the mile or the marathon? I'm going, so by virtue of his answer, he left me whether to do the mile or the 10K. So I ultimately ended up doing the 10,000 at pre, but I still look back and go, damn, I missed my one opportunity to break the 4-minute mile because I knew the workouts that I was doing that I was in shape to break for. Because you know when training what you're capable of doing, you've got a pretty good idea. And so I went to Sydney and ran 2:10 there and won the Sydney marathon. But I still look back and go, would have made a difference in the marathon that race had I run the mile instead of the 10,000? Maybe my leg couldn't have been as tired. Maybe I would have run faster than I did. I'll never know the answer to the question.
Ron may never know the answer to that question, but we can take a guess. I think it's safe to say he would have run the 4-minute mile. In the next episode, more questions that Ron does have the answers to.
I hope you enjoyed another episode of Running in the 70s. Voices, stories, and memories of athletes who were running in the 70s. Until next time, wherever you are, keep looking forward and don't forget to look back.